Hey guys, before we begin, let's just take a moment. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan, get cozy. Maybe you're settling in after a long day, or maybe you're already half asleep, phone slipping from your hand. Either way, I'm glad you're here. And hey, before you drift off into a plague-ridden coma of ancient suffering, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps keep the leeches out of our bloodstream and the YouTube gods mildly amused. Also drop a comment, telling me what time you're listening. Are you working, relaxing, trying to fall asleep? Tell me about your quiet little moment. Okay, ready, because tonight you're not you. You're not curled up under soft blankets with essential oils and a sound machine humming ocean waves. No, you're about to wake up as a peasant during the Antonine Plague in 165 CE, which means you are medically speaking already doomed. And your mattress, try a patchy pile of straw stuffed into a corner of a crumbling mud hut, soaked through with the sweet perfume of mildew, human sweat, rat droppings, and a hint of last night's death. That's not a metaphor. That's the guy who died next to you. He had a name. You forgot it. You shift, barely conscious, and the straw crackles beneath you like dried bones. Which is concerning, because some of it may be dried bones. Your blanket, if you can call it that, is the hide of a goat that died suspiciously fast, which your neighbor insisted wasn't plague-related, just bad luck. You've been sweating through it all night. Fever dreams, check. Woke up screaming once. Yep, you're not alone. Someone coughed blood across the room hours ago. Now it's quiet, suspiciously quiet. And the air you breathe in, and it tastes like old rust, wet clay, and unwashed humanity. Welcome to morning. Congratulations, you've survived the night. For now, you sit up slowly, your joints creaking like badly carved wooden toys. Your head pounds in time with the village rooster, who sounds just as sick as everyone else. You're not sure if it's still alive, or if the same sound is just looping in your head like a cursed chant. There's a wet spot on your tunic that wasn't there yesterday. Maybe blood, maybe sweat, maybe both. You touch your face. Boils. Fantastic. One seems bigger. It's pulsing a little. Nature's way of saying, good morning. We're still inside you. You think about going back to sleep, but then someone outside starts screaming and you remember no rest for the filthy. Somewhere in the corner of your shack, a child is crying softly. You don't know whose. It doesn't matter. You all share space, illness, and despair now. Your legs dangle over the edge of your sleeping pile and sink into cold dirt. Not floorboards, not stone, just earth, packed dry and spotted with the evidence of last night's vomit. Yours possibly. You shuffle upright. You consider stretching, but your back refuses. It has filed a formal complaint against your entire skeleton. You scratch your scalp. Bad idea. You come away with 3 lice, 2 eggs, and a tiny sense of betrayal. One of them waves at you before diving back into your hair. Breakfast is a fantasy at this point, but the real horror is realizing you're hungry. Stomach growling like an angry boar, you stumble toward the door, ducking under the sagging frame. Outside, the morning light hits your face with the warmth of a disinterested god. And what do you see? Smoke in the distance. Another hut burning. Maybe someone inside died and they're cleansing the house. Or maybe someone lived and that's the problem now. Who knows anymore? You cough once. The old woman next door, skin like wrinkled parchment, clutches her rosary and spits on the ground, muttering something about cursed lungs. She's probably not wrong. Your lungs feel like they've been lined with gravel and guilt. The sky is a dull grey, the kind of grey that screams apocalypse, but in a really passive-aggressive tone. Crows caw in the trees. Always crows, like they're rehearsing for your eventual exit. You think about how modern people complain when their barista gets their order wrong. You would kill for a wrong coffee order. You would kill for coffee. You would kill for something warm that doesn't taste like boiled despair, but instead you trudge toward the food pile. Because you poor souls still have a job to do today. And if you don't eat something, anything first, you won't make it to the next scene. You thought this was bad. Oh honey, wait for what counts as breakfast. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is already being scooped out of a cracked clay pot by a woman with 1 tooth, and the expression of someone who stopped caring 3 funerals ago, and the smell wafting from the pot is somewhere between wet grain mouldy sock and hot sadness. But your stomach gurgles like it has no dignity, which, to be fair, it doesn't. Not anymore. So you step up with your wooden bowl, the one you carved yourself last spring during a brief moment of hope and finger mobility, and you hold it out like a beggar at the temple, which frankly you are, because this gruel is technically yours, but only after the local taxman, the priest, and the guy with the cross-eyed donkey take their share. And she ladles it in one sticky steaming blob that wobbles as it lands full of things that might be oats, but might also be insect larvae. And you don't ask questions because hunger doesn't negotiate. It just gnaws louder until you obey. So you take your treasure to the side of the hut, squat in the dirt, and begin the sacred ritual of pretending this is food, except your throat is dry and your lips are cracked, and swallowing is like dragging sandpaper through a paper cut, and halfway through chewing something crunches. But you keep going, because you know that if you stop to gag, someone will try to steal the rest. Probably the pig, the same pig that has been following you around for 3 days now, like it's making a documentary about your downfall, and it looks healthier than you, pinker, plumper, breathing easier, and now it's eyeing your bowl, like it knows you won't finish. Which is fair, because your body is doing that thing again, where it shakes and your vision fuzzes around the edges, and your fingers go numb for just a second, just long enough to drop the spoon, which was already just a piece of wood, vaguely spoon-shaped, and the pig lunges, slurps up what spilled and trots away, without even saying thank you. And you think about chasing it, but instead, you just stare at the dirt, wondering how you went from a breathing person to this walking fever. And around you, others are doing the same, chewing without joy, coughing between bites, eyes sunken so deep they might fall into the bowl. And there's a man nearby, or what's left of one, face blistered, hands shaking, trying to lift a cup to his mouth and missing again and again, until someone takes it from him and just pours it down his shirt. And no one laughs, not even a chuckle, because here dignity is a ghost, and humour died 3 plagues ago. And above it all, the flies swarm like they're auditioning for the role of your next torment, buzzing into your ears, your eyes, your dreams, and the only thing keeping you from screaming is the knowledge that it won't change anything and will only make your throat worse. So you finish what you can, which isn't much, just a few gritty mouthfuls that will sit in your gut like guilt, and then you rinse your bowl with a handful of muddy water, because that's the clean water now, the good water, and you spit ones tasting blood or iron or some ancient rot, and for a second you imagine what it would be like to wake up in your old bed in the future with running water and coffee and flavoured toothpaste and not having to chase pigs for your breakfast. But then someone nearby throws up loudly and reminds you where you really are, in 165 CE, in the middle of a plague, eating spoiled mush, next to a pig that might outlive you. And across the clearing, someone is already collapsing face first into their bowl, and no one moves to help. Because this is normal now, this is morning now. And the real surprise would be someone finishing their meal and walking away upright. And as you stand bowl in hand, joints cracking like dry wood, you realize that this wasn't the worst part of your day. Not even close, because you haven't even tried to clean yourself yet. And you know what comes next. Hygiene, or at least the screaming hilarious joke that passes for it in your village. And trust me, if you thought breakfast was hard to swallow, wait until you try surviving. Roman sanitation without soap. Privacy or mercy. The thing about hygiene in 165 CE is that it isn't a thing. Not in the modern lemon-scented self-care routine kind of way you might be picturing. No, here, it's more of a theory, a whispered rumour passed between peasants like, "Did you hear? someone in Gaul once wiped with linen. And everyone gasps because that's insane. That's luxury, that's witchcraft, and you, dear listener, you don't get linen, you get whatever nature throws at you. Which this morning happens to be a handful of stiff grass, a broken pottery shard, and a stick that might have been used by someone else 2 days ago. And the worst part is, you're used to this. Your hands know the drill. Your nose has gone numb to the stink. And your soul, well, your soul checked out a while back. Probably when you first discovered that your toilet was a shallow pit next to the pig pen, already buzzing with flies and full of so many bodily fluids, you've stopped trying to identify them. And the moment you squat down, knees creaking like the floorboards, you don't have a breeze drifts in, carrying with it the full aroma of a community marinating in its own filth, a sour, meaty perfume of sweat, decay, feces and smoke which combined could probably be weaponized, and as you finish your business wiping with what might be a piece of an old tunic or a cabbage leaf jury's out, you shuffle over to the water bucket for your daily bath, which is a generous word for what's about to happen. Because the water, murky and speckled with things that used to be alive, sits in a cracked basin half filled with dead bugs, oily film, and something unidentifiable. That's either moss or the beginning of a new species. And you splash some on your face and it's ice cold, because of course it is, and it shocks your skin into brief alertness, stinging the tiny cuts you forgot you had, reopening the one on your lip that won't heal. And you scrub with the edge of your tunic, because soap is for senators and gods, not for peasants. On their 7th consecutive month of plague season, and all around you, others are doing the same, dipping rags, spitting into basins, swatting flies, scratching themselves until they bleed. And you see a boy, no older than 7, scraping mud off his leg with a stick, singing a little tune like it's normal, like this is what life is supposed to be, and you almost envy him because he hasn't yet realized that no matter how much you scrub, you never actually feel clean, not truly, not spiritually, not when your fingernails are permanently stained brown and your hair feels like straw dipped in despair. And speaking of hair, you run your hands through yours, or try to, but your fingers snag on a knot so dense it may contain a tiny civilization, and you feel something move in there, so you stop, and you decide that's a problem for later or never, and instead you focus on your teeth which ache in that dull, persistent way that means at least one is on its way out, and you try rubbing your gums with salt, but the only salt around here is the kind you sweat out or cry out. And you're not wasting tears on dental hygiene, so you just rinse with water from the same bucket. Someone just washed their feet in, and if you're wondering how it tastes, imagine a puddle in a barn that's been blessed by at least 3 species of animal, and you'll be close, and you spit it out, and look up at the sky, and wonder, just for a second, what it would feel like to stand in an actual bath, warm water cascading down your back. Bubbles, scented like lavender or coconut, and then someone coughs blood behind you, and you're dragged back to reality, to the dirt under your feet, to the stench in your nose, to the buzzing cloud of flies that's decided your head is prime real estate. And now that you've cleaned yourself technically, you're ready for the next phase of your day, which is trying not to die while working for people who think of you as both disposable and contagious. And if you think the worst part of this morning was scrubbing your face with plague water, just wait until you see what passes for labor conditions in a collapsing empire. Your body creaks like a wagon with one wheel when you rise, if you can call. The slow uncurling of your fever-warped spine rising. And now it's time to get dressed. A ritual so far removed from comfort and dignity that you'd almost rather go out naked, except the sun burns your rash, and the neighbors already gossip that you're cursed. And you don't need that on top of everything else. So you reach for your tunic, the one you've worn every day for the last, forever. Maybe since Hadrian died, and it's stiff with old sweat, scratchy like burlap dipped in regret, and smells like a combination of smoke rot and whatever your body was leaking during last night's fever episode. But hey, it's what you've got. So you slide it over your head, wincing as it scrapes over the scabs forming on your back. And as it settles against your skin, you feel the immediate itch of lice already waking up, stretching their tiny legs, whispering to each other. Breakfast time. And speaking of legs, your trousers, if you can even call 2 pieces of fraying wool, held together with twine trousers, are damp from yesterday's rain, or maybe yesterday's sweat. Honestly, the two are indistinguishable now, and your feet raw and cracked from walking barefoot on fields tilled by broken tools, and human desperation gets shoved into what's left of your sandals, which are mostly string and prayer. And once everything's on, you stand there for a second, motionless, aware of how the clothes don't just weigh on your body, they weigh on your soul, like each stitch was sewn with a different form of suffering. And you can't help but think of modern people scrolling through outfits on their phones, deciding between cozy, casual, and effortlessly chic, while you're deciding if this tunic is too soaked in bodily fluids to wear in public. And spoiler alert, it is, but you're wearing it anyway, because your options are this or full frontal nudity and a plague rash display. And just as you step outside, your neighbor sneezes in your direction and mutters something about your blotchy complexion, and you consider sneezing back as revenge but decide against it, because that would require lung strength you no longer possess. And now you're out in the open, dressed in fabric that might give you tetanus, and smelling like something an undertaker would bury out of politeness. And guess what? It's time for medicine, or rather whatever passes for it here. Because you've been coughing for days, your joints ache, like they've been cursed by every minor deity in the Roman pantheon. And your left eye is doing this weird pulsing thing that no one wants to talk about. And you make your way to the local healer, who is not a doctor, not even close, but a woman who once saw a Greek scroll and now crushes herbs while humming. And she tells you to sniff donkey dung mixed with mint and wrap boiled onions around your neck. And when you ask if that's worked for anyone else, she just shrugs and says, "The gods decide," and you nod. Like that makes sense, because honestly, at this point, why not? And while she's mixing up some new potion made of ash goat urine and maybe dried fish skin, you glance around and see others lined up for their own treatments. One guy snorting powdered moss, another being bled into a bowl while his wife fans him and cries. And over to the side, someone is being lightly beaten with sticks to drive out the demons, and the sticks break before the demons leave. And now your healer is handing you a cup of something steaming and sinister, and you sip it and instantly regret everything you've ever done in life, because it tastes like moldy pennies dissolved in swamp water. And you gag, and she nods approvingly. "That means it's working," she says. And you want to argue, but your tongue has gone numb. And now that you're medicated, or at least successfully poisoned, you stumble away from the hut vision, swimming legs wobbling, and make your way past the village well, where someone is dunking a child who might be possessed or might just be annoying, and you take a deep breath, instantly regret it, because the air smells like smoke, wet hay, and human failure, and you think to yourself, at least the worst part is over. But then your foot hits a warm, squishy something, and you look down and see a dead rat wearing a tiny woven wreath, and you realize it's a plague offering, and you realize you're not even the sickest thing on the street right now. And as you wobble back toward your hovel neck, sticky with onion juice skin, crawling, eye-twitching, dressed in an outfit that feels like it's eating you from the outside in, you think about how modern people complain about being sick in bed with Netflix and soup, and you laugh, then cough, then spit something reddish into the dirt and think, this isn't even the worst part of the day, because the sun is rising and the fields are calling. And it's time to work yourself into a shallow grave for the glory of Rome and the privilege of staying barely alive. You smell it before you see it drifting through the plague thick air like a slap from the gods, a scent so rich, so savory, so unmistakably not for you that it punches you straight in the stomach. And for one wild, irrational moment you think, maybe, just maybe your neighbors are roasting something edible, something meaty, something that didn't die of disease first. But then your brain catches up and reminds you that the people who eat like that don't live here in the mud and blood district. No, they live up on the hill behind walls, behind guards, behind the luxury of distance. And what you're smelling is the midday feast of someone who has never had to boil shoe leather to make broth, someone who doesn't know what it's like to chew bark out of boredom and desperation, and the cruelty of it sits on your tongue, heavier than the gruel from this morning, because the hunger's still there, gnawing, twitching, whispering, and your stomach growls again, loud enough that the guy next to you gives you a look that's equal parts sympathy and survival warning, and you clutch your belly, like that might somehow silence it, but it won't. And even if it did, the shame is already crawling up your spine, because you know you'll be spending your afternoon scything the grain that will become the bread, that will become the tax, that will become the meal, that will become someone else's nap. And you'll get the chaff, the bits stuck in the cracks, the crumbs not worth counting. And you head toward the field with your head down, eyes scanning for edible weeds on the way. Because that's your snack now. Dandelion stems and maybe a beetle. If it's slow and fat enough, and you pass by the villa, the one with the mosaic floor you helped lay 5 years ago, back when you still had molars and hope, and you glimpse the glint of goblets. Hear the laughter, that light, unbothered laughter of people who've never had to bury their own child in a shallow grave, because the priest was busy and the ground was frozen, and you try not to look, not to let your eyes linger on the servants carrying platters heaped with fruit. Real fruit, not dried, not rotted, but juicy, plump, obscene in their abundance. And for a split second, you imagine leaping the wall, grabbing an apple, biting into it like a starving beast. But then you remember Lucius, the man who tried that last year and got a sword through the thigh and a week in the stocks. And you watched as people threw rotten turnips at him until the crows took over. So you keep walking, face down, stomach folding in on itself like paper. And eventually, you make it to the edge of the worksite where the overseer waves his stick, not for encouragement, but to remind everyone who bleeds for whom. And you grab your rusting scythe and join the others. Bent backs, burnt necks, coughing lungs, and you start cutting, slicing through stalks of barley. Like they insulted your mother, your shoulders screaming from the moment you start, because rest is a myth. And stretching is for philosophers, and sweat pours down your face, soaking your filthy tunic. Your eyes sting, your breath wheezes and still. You keep going, because not working means no rations, and no rations mean hunger. And hunger means death or worse, stealing and punishment and chains. And as the sun bakes you from above and the dust rises in little choking clouds below, someone next to you stumbles, then collapses face first into the wheat, and no one stops, not even you, because you've seen this 100 times, and you know the rhythm now. If they twitch, they may be salvageable. If they don't, wait until sundown and drag them out with the rest of the waste. And a small voice in your head whispers that if it were you, you'd want someone to check to stop to care. But that voice has been getting quieter each day, muffled by the sound of your own joints grinding and your breath whistling through what might be a new hole in your lungs. And as you lift, swing repeat over and over until the muscles in your arms scream and your grip weakens and your vision blurs. You remember when someone told you labor was noble, that there was dignity in work, and you want to find that person and slap them with a plague-soaked rag, because this isn't noble. This is slow-motion death with a deadline, and the only dignity you're getting today is if the pigs don't eat your body before the priest does your last rites. And even that's optimistic because lately, even the pigs are picky. And as you move to the next row, cutting through another swath of dry golden misery, your stomach growls again, louder this time. And the man beside you glances over with a look that says, if you die first, he's taking your sandals. And you think to yourself, no, this isn't the worst part either, because the worst part is remembering that all this suffering feeds someone else's comfort. Someone who will never know your name, your pain, or the sound of your stomach folding in on itself, like a dying animal in the dirt. You pause for a second, hands on your knees, head drooping like a wilted turnip, which is coincidentally what you had for dinner 3 nights ago, and what your breath currently smells like. And you tell yourself, it's just a short break, just a moment to catch what little breath your lungs can offer, without coughing out something that might wiggle. But even in stillness, your body is a battlefield, your skin itchy under layers of sweat and dust. And the itch isn't just metaphorical, it's literal. It's crawling alive mobile, like your clothes are holding a secret convention for every parasite this side of the Tiber, and you scratch under your armpit and come away with what may or may not be a flea, the size of a lentil. And you flick it away like you haven't already given up trying to stay clean or safe or even remotely uninfested. And the guy next to you is scratching too aggressively like he's trying to peel off his skin, and he leans over and says, "You got worms yet?" like it's small talk, like he's asking about the weather. And you just nod because of course you do. You've had worms for weeks, maybe months. They're part of you now, your little intestinal roommate squirming away while you shovel down whatever slop the gods provide and converting it directly into more weakness, more nausea, more delightful surprises. During those rare moments you manage to crap without blacking out. And you remember when you thought lice were the worst of it, back in the early days, back when you still had a functioning immune system and some optimism. But that was before the boils, before the coughing blood, before the rash that circles your torso like an evil toga. And now you're just this rotting meat sack shuffling through barley fields, trying not to vomit or scratch too much in public. And don't get started on your feet, because your feet are a separate tragedy altogether. Blistered and cracked, and probably home to at least one fungal species science hasn't discovered yet. And every step you take feels like stepping on hot gravel, except the gravel is made of your own shattered dignity, and the sandals you're wearing are just decorative at this point. Bits of leather flapping with each step, like they're trying to escape you too. And someone once told you Roman sandals were efficient and well designed. And maybe they are for senators, for soldiers, for anyone. Not you, but yours were handed down twice and chewed on by something with tiny teeth and no respect for human suffering. And the overseer blows a whistle and yells something about picking up the pace, and you consider flipping him off, except you need both hands to not fall over. So you just grunt and go back to cutting and hauling, cutting and hauling. A human donkey dragging disease and grain in equal measure. And then comes the moment, the deeply spiritual moment, when you reach down to scratch the back of your knee and feel something move under your tunic. Something not you, something with legs, and you slap it so hard you almost collapse, and it's a tick fat and smug, and you fling it away and swear under your breath and think about how modern people lose their minds over a mosquito bite. And you want to pull them into your world, sit them down in this field of sweat and plague and worms and say, try going a week with 3 species of bloodsuckers taking turns, and as the sun dips lower, the light turns golden in that way poets would find beautiful, if they weren't too busy dying of dysentery out here, and your body aches in places you didn't know had nerve endings, and someone nearby drops their bundle and just sits down, staring at nothing. And no one says anything because we've all been there, and your nose starts bleeding again. Not dramatically, just a slow leak, like your body is quietly falling apart. And you wipe it on your sleeve and keep going, and you wonder in a distant part of your mind, that still imagines a future, if there will ever be a day when you don't have to share your blood with bugs, your intestines with worms, your skin with a family of lice, and you try to laugh, but it comes out a dry cough, and now your ribs hurt, and you take a moment to look up at the sky, hoping for a sign, a cloud shaped like mercy, a breeze that doesn't carry death, but is just blue and blank and silent, and you whisper to yourself, still better than last week, and you don't know if that's funny or tragic, but you keep moving because the field doesn't care, the overseer doesn't care, and the empire sure as hell doesn't care. And as you drag one foot after another through the dirt surrounded by people, more parasite than person, you remind yourself that this is only midday, and you still have hours to go before you can lie back down in your lice nest and dream of a world where you don't wake up itching, bleeding, or worse. Your body's doing that thing again, where it forgets what it's supposed to be doing, like a broken cart with no wheels, just slowly tipping forward under the weight of its own uselessness. And as you drag your worm-filled, rash-ridden, parasite-crawling shell back toward the edge of the field, where the tool pile is just a sad heap of rust and splinters, you realize that your tunic is sticking to your back, not just from sweat, but from something thicker, tackier, possibly blood, possibly pus, possibly both, because your skin has decided to enter its ooze era, and there's a tender spot near your shoulder blade that pulses like it's thinking about becoming sentient, and you'd check it out if you could twist that far without dislocating something, but you can't. So instead, you just accept it like everything else, like the pain in your gums that's getting worse, like the blackened toenail that fell off this morning without any fanfare, like the fact that your entire digestive system is basically just a series of increasingly untrustworthy guesses, and someone nearby coughs hard enough to drop to their knees, and you take one step to help and then stop, because the last time you tried to be a good Samaritan, you ended up catching whatever made that guy's eye go milky overnight, and you're not playing that game again. Not with a body that feels like it's being slowly peeled by invisible rats. And speaking of bodies, yours is wrapped in the same cursed fabric. It started the day in now, soaked through with the kind of dampness that turns into rot, if given a few more hours, and it scratches, grates, rasps against your skin with every breath, every movement. Like your entire outfit was tailored by demons with a wool fetish, and you know, you should change clothes, but the only other tunic you have is the one someone died in. And frankly, you're not sure if trading one haunted garment for another is an upgrade. And then there's the matter of your health, or what remains of it. A sad, sputtering candle of existence flickering in the wind of pestilence and neglect. And the irony is that technically, you're still considered one of the healthy ones. Healthy enough to work, to lift, to shovel, to be shouted at by a man with clear skin and clean sandals, who keeps reminding you that the gods reward labor, even as the gods clearly reward him more for yelling than you for bleeding, and your mouth tastes metallic again, maybe from a cracked molar, maybe from the sore that's been slowly spreading across your tongue like it's colonizing new land, and when you spit it's pink, not quite blood, not, and you blink hard because your vision's doing that blur snap blur thing again, and you're trying to ignore it, trying to pretend that you just need water or food or anything, besides another day of dragging your body around like a wet sack of pain. But deep down, you know it's not dehydration or hunger. It's something inside you that's just ending, turning off the lights one system at a time. And maybe it's the plague. Or maybe it's just what happens when you live in a society that treats poor people like replaceable parts in a giant creaky death machine. And you look down at your arms at the weird purple spots blooming like mold at the scratches you made last night without realizing it. And you think, guess this is how it starts. And you don't panic because panic takes energy and you don't have any, and no one else does either. Because everyone here is slowly crumbling. One infection, one cough, one worm, one scab at a time. And you realize you can't remember the last time someone looked okay, just okay, not even good, not even clean, just not actively dying. And that thought stays with you as you pass by a group of women rinsing linens in a stream that smells faintly of blood and mostly of regret. Their hands raw red nails broken, and one of them mutters a prayer to Apollo. And you want to tell her, Apollo doesn't care. Apollo is busy with rich people, but you keep it to yourself. Because you used to pray too until the last time you got a fever, and the priest told you to stop sinning, and you wondered what sin it was to be born poor, and boil your water in a cracked pot. And as you finally reach the edge of the village square, where the flies are thicker and the shade is thinner, and your knees threaten to give out entirely, you pause just long enough to scratch behind your ear, feel something pop, and then something wet dribble down your neck, and you don't even flinch because this is the new normal. This is your version of wellness, and as you sit on a crooked bench that groans under your weight like it too is tired of existing, you see someone point at your arm and whisper, "Plague mark," like it's a curse, and maybe it is. But you don't have the energy to argue. You don't even have the energy to respond. You just stare at them, blank and sunburned and hollow, and think, I hope it is, because if it's not, if this is still the early stage, then that means you have to live through more of this, and honestly, that might be worse. You don't remember falling asleep, because it wasn't sleep, in the relaxing, restorative, dream-filled sense. It was more like your body shutting down mid-sentence, collapsing sideways against the warped wooden bench, like a puppet whose strings got cut by exhaustion and a low-grade fever. And now you're waking up sort of blinking against the dull light of a sun that hasn't moved nearly enough for your liking. And the first thing you feel is not relief or rest, but pain, a deep grinding ache in your spine that tells you your back will never forgive you for sitting like that, and your neck won't either, and neither will the open sore that's bloomed just under your left shoulder blade, and is now crusted to the inside of your tunic, which peels away with a damp, sticky rip like tearing off an old bandage. And you don't even wince because the pain is already a constant hum, like background music for your suffering. And the second thing you feel is the familiar, horrifying itch of lice, because your nap was not a break from the insects. Oh no, it was an invitation, and they must have thrown a party while you were unconscious, because now they're everywhere, crawling down your back, nesting in your hair, taking leisurely walks across your ribs like they're on a plague-ridden holiday, and you scratch claw, dig your nails into your skin, like you can somehow reach deep enough to evict them permanently. But all it does is draw blood and stir them up. And you think, not for the first time, that if reincarnation is real, you must have done something truly unforgivable in your last life to deserve this much crawling in this one. And someone behind you mutters about bad omens and the full moon, and points to your scabbed over leg with a look that suggests you might be contagious, and you want to laugh because of course you're contagious. Everyone's contagious. You live in a village where social distancing means dying in your own hut instead of someone else's. And the local concept of public health is don't sneeze in the soup, which is funny because the soup is already made of sadness and rat bones, and as you stand up, legs trembling like you've aged 50 years in your sleep. Which honestly isn't far off. You shuffle toward the communal water bucket again because your mouth is dry, your tongue sticking to your teeth, and your breath smells like something died inside you last week and is still trying to file a complaint. But when you get there, the bucket's empty. Just a sad wooden ring with a wet circle at the bottom and a few drowned bugs that gave up halfway through their suicide swim. And someone's already taken the ladle, which doesn't really matter because you were going to cup it with your hands anyway, even though your hands are now home to at least 2 visible fungal colonies and 1 suspicious blister that seems to be growing a face. And you turn around defeated by thirst again. And as you limp back toward the row of huts, you hear someone wailing. Not in the theatrical, dramatic way, but in that quiet, scraping way that makes your chest tighten, and you follow the sound even though you shouldn't, even though you know what it means. And sure enough, there's a woman kneeling in the dirt, her hands pressed to the face of a boy who's not moving, and you don't ask questions because you don't need to. You know that stillness, you've seen it a dozen times this month alone, and no one else stops. No one rushes over because the grief isn't special anymore. It's routine, and all you can do is stand there for a second watching as she rocks back and forth, whispering something to him, something you can't hear and wouldn't want to. And you turn away before you're pulled too deep into it, before her sorrow reminds you of every face you've already buried in your memory, and you find yourself staring at the horizon, squinting through the heat haze, wondering how far you'd get if you just started walking, just turned and walked away from this whole rotting mess of a life. But then your knees remind you that you're not going anywhere fast, and your gut reminds you that you haven't eaten since the bugs ate half your breakfast. And the pit in your stomach is now not just hunger, but a kind of existential nausea, like your body's revolting against existing, and you think maybe you should go to the healer, see if there's anything she can do. But then you remember that last time she smeared goat fat on your boils and gave you a necklace of garlic and told you to stop offending the gods. So instead, you just limp forward back toward your corner of the world, where maybe someone left half a turnip behind, or maybe the rats got it first, and you wonder if rats get sick too, or if they're smarter than all of you, if they know how to avoid the dead and the dying, and the water and the fever. And as the sun bakes your skin into a shade somewhere between dirt and despair, you think again that maybe today will be the day it gets better, and then immediately think, idiot, and scratch the back of your neck where a louse just bit you hard enough to draw blood, and remember again that this is your life. This is health, this is survival, Roman peasant-style plague edition. You make your way back to your hut, if you can still call it that, a lopsided patchwork of mud, straw, and despair that looks like it was built by someone with a grudge against structural integrity, and you duck inside as the sun starts dipping low, the light filtering in through the holes in the wall, like dying fireflies, and the air inside is somehow worse than outside. Thicker, heavier, like it's holding its breath, waiting for you to drop, and the familiar smell hits you in the face. A heady mix of mildew, sour sweat, damp wool, and something faintly metallic, which might be blood, might be rot, or might just be the general aroma of hopelessness. And you drop down onto the same pile of scratchy straw and flattened rags you slept on last night, every joint in your body groaning like a broken siege engine. And for a moment, you just sit there, breathing shallowly, eyes half closed, tuning into the ambient soundtrack of misery that never really stops. Someone coughing in the next hut over a baby, crying 2 doors down. A dog barking at nothing. And in the far-off distance, a priest chanting something about divine wrath. Because even as you try to rest, the gods are out there somewhere judging you, apparently deciding whether your rash is just a rash or a curse. And you'd laugh if your throat wasn't so raw from dry coughing and accidental screaming. And as you reach down to untie the grimy cloth you've had wrapped around your ankle all day, which was supposed to help with the swelling, and instead just locked the infection in like a warm little vacation home for bacteria, you notice the discoloration has spread, creeping up your calf like ivy with bad intentions, and the skin's tight and glossy. Now the kind of shiny that means your body's definitely planning something dramatic, but you look away because you don't want to think about it. Not right now, not while you're still conscious. And instead you focus on the routine, the rituals that pass for comfort. Now you shake the lice out of your blanket, not because you think it helps, but because it gives your hand something to do, and you pick at the scab on your arm until it bleeds a little, just to make sure you still feel something, and you rub your eyes, even though it stings, and then you lie back slowly, carefully, like your entire body is a cracked amphora, threatening to shatter with the wrong move. and you stare at the ceiling, or what's left of it, a net of beams and holes and spider webs, and for a moment, you let yourself pretend you're staring at stars, that you're lying in a field, warm, clean, fed safe, and then something cold and alive scurries across your foot, and the illusion shatters, and you kick out instinctively, sending a small cloud of dust and fur flying, and you sit up, coughing again, and you're so tired of coughing, of tasting the coppery tang of maybe blood, of wondering if this is just normal plague fatigue, or the beginning of the end. And as you prop yourself up against the wall, fingers trembling, lips dry and cracked, you hear footsteps outside, slow and heavy, and then someone knocks softly, and your stomach drops because no one knocks here. Not unless they're bringing news, and not the good kind. And the door creaks open, and it's your cousin, the one who used to help carry water. When you could still stand for more than 10 minutes without needing to sit down, and he looks pale like he's been chewing chalk, and his hands are shaking, and he's holding something wrapped in cloth, and he steps inside and sets it down and says, "It's from your aunt, something warm, some kind of stew, and you want to thank him, you do." But all that comes out is a hoarse wheeze, and he just nods like he understands, and he does, because he's seen it too. Seen what happens when the symptoms go from annoying to final. And he doesn't stay long, just drops the bundle and steps back outside, pulling the door close behind him like he's trying not to trap anything inside. And you reach for the bundle, unwrap it slowly, fingers stiff, and inside there's a little bowl of something that might have started life as a root vegetable, maybe a turnip, maybe not swimming in a broth the color of regret, and it smells burnt and bitter and possibly medicinal, but it's warm. And that alone is enough to make you tear up, which you don't have the water for. But your eyes sting anyway, and you sip it slowly, grateful in a way that aches, because this is the best thing you've had in days. And for a moment, you let the warmth sit on your tongue, and you close your eyes and pretend it's chicken soup, and not whatever plant they found on the side of the road, and you lean back holding the bowl in both hands, like it's holy, and you think just for a moment that maybe you'll make it through the night, that maybe tomorrow will be better. And then a crash outside startles you, and someone screams, and you remember where you are and what time it is, and what happens when the sun goes down, and the dark comes creeping in, full of fever dreams and dying moans and things that don't knock first. You wake up again. Or maybe you never really slept. It's hard to tell anymore because the nights blur into the days now. A slow churn of light and shadow and coughing fits and distant screams, and your joints feel like they've been boiled in vinegar, and your mouth tastes like wet rope, and your stomach is doing that hollow twisting thing it does when it's unsure whether to throw up or digest itself. And as you sit up, spine popping like a cheap wine cork, you notice the hut feels heavier, thicker somehow, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. Like the walls have leaned in closer during the night, just to listen to you breathe. And as you push yourself up to standing, wobbling like a newborn calf, you hear the shouts outside the barked commands, the clatter of sandals on dirt, and you already know what it is, because there's only one thing that makes that kind of sound in your village authority, and not the good kind, not the protecting kind, but the kind that shows up with sticks and scrolls, and demands the kind that doesn't ask if you're okay, but tells you to pay to work to move to obey. And as you step outside, blinking against the pale morning light, you see them, 3 of them clad in stiff leather with bronze studs and expressions like sour milk. The local tax enforcers, the ones who make sure your suffering is properly redistributed upward. And they're already yelling at someone near the well, something about missed quotas and improper tithes and suspicious excuses. And you freeze because you know your own dues are due overdue, forgotten somewhere between your last fever and your most recent bout of boils, and you can't remember what you were supposed to give this month. Grain labour your soul, but you know. Whatever it is, You probably don't have it, and as one of them turns and locks eyes with you, you feel that old deep-rooted fear ignite in your chest. The kind that goes back generations. The kind passed down in the bone marrow of peasants who've spent centuries learning to smile just right, so they don't get flogged for frowning. And he walks over boots crunching the dry earth, and he says your name or a version of it, and you nod yes, that's you, or what's left of you. And he asks for your payment, and you try to explain voice scratchy and barely there, that you've been sick, that your crops failed, that the rats ate your stored barley, that your brother took the last of the grain to trade for medicine that didn't work. But he cuts you off with a wave already bored, already irritated, and he says, the empire doesn't recognize excuses, only debts. And you want to ask him if the empire recognizes plague or poverty or worms, or the fact that you can barely stand without leaning against something, but you don't. You just bow your head and shuffle back into your hut, rummaging through the pitiful pile of your belongings, fingers brushing over scraps of fabric, a wooden spoon, a broken knife, a single dried fig. You've been saving for what was supposed to be a special moment, but now feels more like emergency bribe material, and you bring it back out along with your last threadbare shawl, and hold them out like they're treasures, and he takes them without looking, without even pretending they're enough, and tells you he'll be back next week, and that you'd better have more or else. And then he moves on just like that, like you didn't just give him your last edible thing, and the only piece of cloth that didn't reek of decay, and you stand there for a moment, empty-handed, empty-bellied, empty, everything, and watch as he moves on to the next poor soul, and you realize again how the hierarchy works out here. People like him don't have to explain anything, don't have to justify why they're taking only you, have to justify why you have so little left. And the worst part is this is normal, this is expected. This is what passes for order. And no one protests, because protesting gets you whipped or fined or vanished. And you think about that word order and how it's supposed to mean fairness or stability or peace. But here it just means you suffer in a straight line instead of in chaos. And as the enforcers finally leave, taking with them a few bushels of grain, a live chicken, and the dignity of half your neighbors, you sit back down on the bench outside your hut and scratch at your leg until it bleeds again, because at least that pain is honest. And you look around at the others, at the way no one talks, no one looks up, no one breathes too loudly, because everyone knows that law and justice are two entirely separate things now. And law doesn't care if you're dying, only that you die in the proper tax bracket. And as you lean your head against the wall, stomach growling, body buzzing with fatigue, you think, so this is what power looks like from below. It looks like polished sandals stepping over your face without even glancing down. The town square isn't really a square, not in the neat geometric way your modern brain might picture, not clean cobbles and fountains and cheerful markets, but more like a blotch, a bald patch in the center of the chaos, where people gather not because they want to, but because they have to. A place where things happen to people, not for them. And you find yourself there now, not by choice, but by the pull of inevitability, the way pain gravitates toward its audience. And you're standing near the back because you've learned that being up front just makes you easier to notice, easier to blame, easier to hit. And there's already a buzz in the air, a crackling tension that hums under your skin. And you glance around and see that same sick anticipation reflected on every tired face, the mixture of curiosity and fear, because they've brought someone in, dragged him in really, and he's on his knees now, hair matted, tunic torn, one eye swollen shut, the other staring straight into the dust. And someone whispers that he stole a loaf of bread, maybe two, maybe from the villa kitchens, and that alone is enough to get you killed. Not because the bread is worth that much, but because defying the order, the hierarchy, the fiction of control, that's the real crime. And this man, this desperate, hungry man, has violated the grand illusion that the rich deserve their comfort, and the rest of you deserve your hunger. And so, he's going to be made into an example, which is a fancy way of saying he's about to be hurt in public, so that you won't try anything brave or stupid or human in the future. And the magistrate appears flanked by 2 enforcers, both of them puffed up like they're carved from granite. Though you've seen one of them cry once when he got bitten by a sick dog, and the magistrate reads something from a scroll, his voice thin and bored. Like this is a grocery list and not a man's fate. And then the punishment is announced 20 lashes and confiscation of goods. Though you're not sure what goods the man has left besides bruises, and he doesn't even beg, which is worse. Somehow, just stares ahead while they tie his hands to the whipping post, and the first strike cracks like dry firewood, and the second like breaking bones, and by the 5th you've stopped counting because counting makes it too real. And people watch, some flinching, some nodding grimly, some turning away, but no one leaves, no one stops it. And neither do you, because that's not how this world works. And deep down, as horrible as it is, there's a part of you that feels a tiny bit of relief, because it's not you up there today. And that's the secret. Everyone here carries that twisted sense of relief that floats to the surface every time someone else takes the fall. Because in a place like this, survival means accepting that mercy is rare and random and never comes for free. And when it's over, when the man is cut down and left to crawl away or die, where he falls, no one cheers, no one claps. They just scatter back to their huts, back to their labor, back to pretending this is all normal. And you stand there for a second longer, hands clenched, nails digging into your palms, and you want to scream, want to throw something, do something. But instead you turn and walk away too, because you're tired, because you're starving, because even your anger is on rations now. And as you pass the temple on your way back, you see another gathering, smaller, quieter. A priest standing over a boy with sunken eyes and blue lips, muttering prayers, waving incense declaring him possessed or punished, or unclean, depending on which god they're blaming today. And the mother kneels beside the child, her face blank, her hands trembling, and no one touches her. No one comforts her, because grief is contagious now, like everything else. And the priest drops a handful of ashes on the boy's forehead and walks away, robes fluttering like the wings of some sacred buzzard, and the boy doesn't move, and no one checks if he's breathing, because that's not the point. The ritual is the performance of care without the inconvenience of action, and you keep walking, passing a group of children poking a rat with a stick, half curious, half hungry, and you know that look, because you've worn it too, and one of them turns and stares at you with those hollow, serious eyes kids get when they learn too soon that life isn't fair and nobody's coming to save them. And you nod like you're acknowledging a fellow prisoner, and they nod back, and you walk on slower now. Not because your legs hurt, though they do, but because you're dragging the weight of the entire day behind you. Every crack of the whip, every whispered prayer, every unspoken truth that floats like ash in the air. And by the time you reach your hovel again, the sun has shifted just enough to cast long shadows across the dirt. And you realize you've spent the whole day watching people be punished for being poor, for being sick, for being hungry. And you think, is this justice? Is this order? Is this the great Roman civilization everyone talks about? And you sit down hard on the ground, knees buckling under the weight of that question, and you scratch at the dirt with your fingers like you're trying to dig up a different answer. And all you find are rocks and roots, and the bitter knowledge that tomorrow will look exactly like today, unless of course it doesn't. Because tomorrow, you might be the one tied to the post, or the one laying in the dust, or the one who doesn't wake up at all. You sit there long enough for your shadow to grow long and thin beside you, stretched across the ground, like a thread barely holding you to the earth. And your hands are still dusty from digging at nothing. Fingernails lined with grime, little crescent moons of filth carved in as proof that you tried to touch something, anything real. And even now, with the square emptying out and the shouting replaced by distant coughing, you can't shake the feeling that this place isn't just killing you. Slowly, it's shaping you into something smaller, more manageable, like it's shaving down the edges of your soul until all that's left is a person-shaped husk that follows rules and gives up quietly. And somewhere behind you, someone lights a fire, and the smoke snakes through the alleys, carrying with it that bitter, choking blend of burning dung and wet wood. And maybe something else you'd rather not identify, and it curls around your face, your shoulders, your breath, until you can't tell if your eyes are watering from the smoke or from something deeper. Something that lives under your ribs and only shows up when you stop moving. And it's in that moment, while you're staring at the ground and trying to convince yourself that this isn't permanent, that you hear them bells soft and slow. Not temple bells, not funeral chimes, but the ones tied to the belts of the plague carts. And your blood runs cold because you know what that means. And you don't want to see it. You don't want to see who they're bringing out this time. But your body moves anyway. Neck-turning eyes locking onto the approaching cart pulled by a mule that looks as sick as everyone else, led by two men in long stained robes who've stopped bothering to cover their faces properly. And on the cart, piled like broken furniture, are the bodies, some wrapped, some not, some small, some terrifyingly small. And your stomach twists in on itself because you recognize the shawl on one of them. A faded purple thing you've seen before, worn by the woman who lived 3 huts down, the one who used to hum while she stirred her stew and share scraps with the children too young to beg. And now she's lying there, jaw slack, eyes half open, as if even death didn't want to deal with closing them. And the cart creaks as it rolls past wheels, groaning, mule snorting, and everyone watches, but no one speaks because grief has become so common. It no longer requires words, just silence. And the priest trailing behind mutters blessings, flicking holy water that lands on the dirt like tears no one bothers to cry. And you turn away, because if you don't, you're going to lose whatever shreds of yourself you've managed to hang on to today. And you stumble back inside your hut, closing the door behind you like it might keep the world out, like it might trap the grief on the other side of the wood and straw. And you sit down, hard legs folding underneath you. And for a moment, the only sound is your breathing, shaky, uneven, thick. And you let yourself sag, spine curling, head dropping into your hands, and it hits you all at once. That there's no plan, no help coming, no line of aid, caravans rounding the bend with warm blankets and medicine, and people who care. Because that's not how this works. That's not how it's ever worked. And the people who decide whether you live or die have never even set foot in this village, never smelled this air, never watched their neighbors be loaded like garbage onto a cart and rolled away without ceremony. And your chest tightens, not with illness this time, but with a cold, crushing clarity. And you think, what if tomorrow it's you? What if your body makes that same trip? Your tunic stiff with sweat and fever, your name forgotten before the wheels finish turning, and you feel a scream claw its way up your throat, but you swallow it down because no one wants to hear it. And what's worse, no one would answer, and you press your hands into your face until your bones ache and whisper to yourself quietly, like a secret, that you're still here, that you're still breathing, that has to mean something. And outside, the bells fade into the distance, swallowed by the wind, and someone starts singing softly, out of tune, some lullaby you half remember from childhood, and the sound drifts through the cracks in your walls and settles in your chest like a blanket. You didn't know you needed, and for just a second you let it soothe you. Let it fill the space between horror and exhaustion, and you lie back, eyes half closed, listening to that shaky voice carrying through the twilight like a thread stitching you to the rest of the broken world. And you think maybe, just maybe, if you make it through one more night, if the boils don't burst and the fever doesn't spike and the coughing doesn't shake your lungs loose, maybe you'll wake up tomorrow and still have the strength to care. And maybe that's enough for now, because in a world where everything has been taken from you, choosing to survive just one more day might be the closest thing you've got to resistance. The sun has barely risen, when the chanting starts slow and low like a warning hum in the earth's throat, and you know it before you even open your eyes, because the sound crawls through the cracks in the walls and coils around your spine like a snake. And when you sit up, muscles groaning and skull buzzing, with that low-grade, ever-present headache you've stopped bothering to treat you. Already feel the dread blooming in your chest, because today is one of those days, the kind where the priest takes center stage, the kind where the invisible gods you've been accused of offending demand attention, blood, repentance, or all three, and you stumble to your feet, pulling your tunic over your head, still damp from yesterday's sweat and soaked through with the kind of funk that makes your eyes water. And you step outside into a morning that smells like burned incense and old ash, and the kind of smoke that means someone's fire has been burning all night for something other than warmth. And you join the others without speaking, because no one talks during procession days, not unless they want to be singled out for suspicion. And as you move through the narrow dirt lanes toward the square, you see them, the holy men, their faces painted with streaks of ochre and soot, their eyes wild in that way only the truly convinced or the dangerously performative can pull off. And they beat drums and ring bells and shout about divine punishment, about the wrath of the gods brought down on your sinful, festering little village. And you stand there like everyone else still, and silent, and swallowing your cynicism, because nobody wants to hear what you actually think about divine judgment when you haven't had clean water in 2 weeks, and your neighbor died choking on his own tongue while the priest chanted psalms over a jar of spoiled olive oil, and they start naming sins, of course they do, calling out the usual suspects: greed, pride, lust, forgetting to tithe missing festivals, speaking back to elders, coughing in temple, or dreaming too loud. And you can feel the crowd's unease tighten around you like a belt, because we all know the game. We all know. This is less about religion and more about control, about redirecting the rage and fear and grief into something manageable, something punishable, something that isn't the empire's broken systems, or the plague, or the landlord's greed, or the healer's failure, or the rats, or the hunger, or the hopelessness. And today's scapegoat is a young woman you recognize, barely more than a girl really, who used to sing while she swept the alleys, whose voice was too joyful for a place like this. And now she's on her knees in the center of the square, head bowed, hands tied, and the priest is accusing her of consorting with demons, of poisoning the well, with impure thoughts, of inviting plague with her impudent laughter. And no one moves, no one speaks. And the worst part is that a few people look like they believe it, like they really think this girl had the power to conjure a plague that's been killing children and priests and pigs alike for years now. And the priest raises a clay jug over her head, one of those ritual vessels filled with purifying herbs and water that smells like boiled regret, and he pours it over her slow and dramatic, while muttering in a language that none of you speak, but all of you fear. And she flinches and gasps and tries to look strong, but her face crumples, and something in you snaps just a little, just enough to make your hands ball into fists at your sides. But you keep still, because you've seen what happens to people who object. And the last one who did was labeled a blasphemer and put in the stocks for 2 days until his legs stopped working. And no one asked what happened after that. And the priest finishes his speech with a thunderous, "Let this be a warning." And the crowd murmurs their forced amens like hostages reciting a script. And she's led away, drenched and shivering. And no one follows her. No one helps her. Not even you, and you hate yourself for it. But you also know you'll be the one blamed next if you do. And this is how it works. How belief becomes a blade. How rituals become punishment. How faith becomes a tool to manage the unmanageable. And as the square slowly empties, you stay rooted in place, staring at the wet earth where she knelt, thinking about how religion here is less about salvation and more about surveillance. A system designed to make you police your neighbors, fear your impulses and bury your questions. And as you finally turn and walk back toward your hut, you pass the temple steps where offerings are already piled, wilted vegetables, dead birds, the last coins someone could part with, and you wonder what the gods even do with any of it. If they're watching, if they care, or if they're just figments dreamed up by desperate people, trying to put meaning to a life that keeps getting shorter and sicker and more absurd. And you try to remember a time when you believed, really believed, when prayer felt like something more than talking to the ceiling, and you can't not really not anymore. And as the smoke from the burnt offering drifts into your eyes and makes them sting you, tell yourself, it's just the smoke, and not the quiet truth setting in that if there are gods, they stopped listening a long time ago. Later in the day, after the shouting has faded and the bells have stopped ringing, and the girl who was accused of summoning demons has disappeared back into whatever hole she's been forced to crawl into, you find yourself wandering, not because you want to, not because you have anywhere to be, but because staying in one place too long makes the thoughts creep in too loud, and your feet take you past the edge of the square, past the temple, past the hut with the broken roof where the old healer used to live, before she caught something worse than what she claimed she could cure. And now, you're just walking slowly through the brittle little veins of this village that used to feel like a place, and now feels like a graveyard wearing a mask. And you pass by a man sitting cross-legged in front of a cracked wall, hands raised to the sky, whispering something that might be a prayer, or might be a curse, or might just be nonsense. And no one stops him because madness isn't even rare anymore. It's almost expected, and you keep walking until you're far enough away that you can breathe again, if shallowly. And ahead of you is one of the roadside shrines, one of the tiny ones, barely big enough to shelter a bird. Just a worn stone pedestal with an old wooden statue jammed into it, some weather-eaten carving of a minor god. No one really remembers, but no one dares forget either. And the offering bowl at its feet is cracked and empty except for a few pebbles and a tuft of animal fur that might be rat or cat or something in between. And you crouch there, not because you believe, not because you're hoping for a sign or a miracle or even mercy, but because it feels like something to do, like a pause in the chaos. And you stare at that blank wooden face with its half-rotted smile and chipped nose, and wonder if it was ever supposed to resemble anything divine, or if it was always just a placeholder, a stand-in for the comfort people used to feel before the god started getting lazy or drunk or bored, and your fingers twitch with the sudden urge to tip the statue over, just to see if anything happens, if the skies crack open, or your boils vanish, or if someone finally notices you're angry, but you don't. You don't even touch it, because even now, even after all the nothing you've been given, you're still a little bit scared of breaking the rules, of tempting something old and powerful and just mean enough to notice. And that fear is part of the machinery here, the way it keeps turning, even when all the gears are rusted and blood-soaked. And you think about the stories they told you when you were a child, the tales of gods watching from the heavens of judgment and justice and eternal rewards for the faithful. And you realize how much those stories sound like bedtime lies told by exhausted parents, trying to get their starving children to sleep without screaming. And you wish they'd told you the truth instead. That sometimes you give everything you have, every crumb of belief, every prayer spoken in the dark with hands trembling and breath thin, and all you get back is silence. Or worse, a priest telling you to repent harder because your dying sister probably angered Jupiter with her impure dreams, and the bile rises in your throat and you spit it into the dirt beside the shrine, watching it soak into the ground like a bitter little offering of your own, And somewhere above you, a crow caws sharp and ugly, and it sounds more honest than any sermon you've heard in months. And you push yourself back up to your feet, knees cracking, and you look at that statue one last time before turning away, and you think, maybe the gods were never real, or maybe they are, and they just don't care anymore. Maybe they saw what we turned into and decided we weren't worth saving. And either way, the end result's the same. You suffer, you rot. You try not to die too loudly, and you keep moving, because stopping means getting swallowed by the fear that all of this was for nothing. And you pass a woman kneeling beside a shallow grave, whispering the names of her children into the dust, and a boy dragging a sack of mouldy bread behind him like a prize, and a dog with ribs like fence posts sniffing a pile of something too unrecognizable to be called food. And you know, none of this is normal, but it's become your normal, your new sacred, and you wonder how long it takes before the soul forgets what it felt like to hope. And you wonder if yours already has, and by the time you get back to your hovel, the sky is starting to shift, the sun limping its way down behind the hills, and the shadows stretch long and thin like ghosts trying to crawl home. And you sit by the door and stare out at nothing, listening to the wind rustle through the grass, and the faint distant sound of someone singing again off-key and fragile like a threadbare hymn offered to an indifferent sky, and you whisper something into the air. Not a prayer exactly, but not one either. And for a second you think maybe the wind carries it somewhere, maybe to a God who's listening, maybe just into the void. But either way, you don't say it again, because once is enough. Once is already too much to ask. The wind dies down after dusk, and that should be a relief. But instead, it makes everything feel too still, too quiet. Like the village is holding its breath, waiting for something it doesn't want to name. And you sit there at the threshold of your hut, hunched over with your arms around your knees, watching the last scraps of daylight fade into the dirt as the sky bleeds out from grey to charcoal to black. And you can smell the smoke again. Always the smoke, thin and bitter and ever-present, like it's woven into the air itself, like a low whisper reminding you that something somewhere is always burning, and your stomach growls, not a polite rumble, but a twisting, aggressive snarl that makes your ribs creak, and you ignore it, not because you want to, but because there's nothing left to give it, nothing left to chew or swallow, or even lick for a taste of salt or sweetness or hope. And you think about the dried fig you gave up to the tax collector, and for a wild second you almost laugh. Not because it's funny, but because you genuinely can't tell if that moment was yesterday or a lifetime ago. And you reach up to scratch your scalp, and your fingers come back with something crusty and unpleasant that you decide not to think too hard about. Because at this point, your body is less a temple and more a crumbling ruin, crawling with tenants. You didn't invite an inside your hut. It's getting darker by the second, shadows piling into the corners like secrets. You forgot to clean up, and you know you should light a lamp or a torch, or even a twist of oiled cloth if you can find one. But you don't, because you're conserving, because you're always conserving. Now energy, oil, food, emotions, like everything's rationed, even if no one said it out loud, and maybe especially the feelings, because it's not safe to feel too much anymore. Not when every day scrapes another layer off you, and there's nothing left to grow back, and somewhere nearby you hear a familiar voice whispering a prayer, the kind of half-sung chant meant to keep evil spirits away, and you wonder if they really believe it works, or if they're just reciting it out of habit, like brushing your teeth in the dark, or muttering curses when you stub your toe. And then you remember that no one brushes their teeth here and curses are practically currency, so maybe it's both and. Your eyes drift to the tiny wooden charm hanging from the inside of your doorway, cracked and stained and useless. but still there because taking it down would feel like a dare, like asking for attention from something you've spent your whole life trying not to anger. And maybe that's what belief is now. Not hope or faith or love, but fear wrapped in ritual superstition passed off as security. And you wonder when exactly you stop believing in the gods. Not the loud, flashy disbelief you tell yourself you've adopted, but the quiet shift, the slow erosion like sand slipping through your fingers until you realize there's nothing left to grip. And as the dark settles in deeper, wrapping around the village like a shroud, you hear someone scream, not a loud, dramatic scream, but the kind of scream that sounds like it slipped out by accident, raw and sharp, and then immediately cut off, and you freeze holding your breath, waiting for more, waiting for the follow-up, the shouting, the running, the panic. But nothing comes, and that's worse somehow, because the silence that follows is heavier, thicker, and you sit there trying to pretend you didn't hear it, trying to believe that it was a dream or a dog, or just your mind turning up the volume on your worst expectations. But you know better, you've lived here too long. You know that silence after a scream means one of two things. Either someone's dead, or someone's about to wish they were, and you shift your weight. Like you might get up, like you might go check, but you don't. You can't, not because you're afraid of what you'll see, but because you already know, and confirming it won't help anyone, and will only add another face to the lineup in your brain that shows up every time you close your eyes. So you stay still, frozen in your doorway like a stone guardian to a kingdom of decay. And eventually the village settles again. The usual night sounds returning like a bad routine. Distant coughing, rustling, animals, the occasional moan or muttered dream. And you lie back down on the hard floor, curling onto your side knees to chest, trying to keep the heat of your own body from escaping. And you whisper to yourself that you're safe, that nothing's going to happen, that you've made it through the worst of it, and you almost believe it. But then the wind picks up again, just enough to make the door creak, and the charm knocks softly against the frame, like someone tapping to be let in, and you shut your eyes tight and pull the scratchy blanket up to your chin, and pretend that superstition is the same thing as safety. Pretend that fear can't find you if you don't look it in the face. Pretend that God still watch over people like you, even if only to keep count. Morning doesn't so much arrive as it drags itself in like a half-dead mule, limp and pale and too tired to bother pretending it's a new day. And when you finally crack your eyes open, everything already feels wrong. Your tongue is dry, your head's pulsing, like there's a tiny man hammering behind your eyes, and your stomach is eating itself again. That familiar hollow ache that never really leaves, just fades to background noise until the sun comes up. And you remember there's nothing left to eat, not even crumbs or scraps or a half-melted root that maybe kind of looks like food if you squint and you sit up slow, every joint creaking, like it's got its own opinion about the weather, which is colder than it should be, wetter too. Like the air decided to forget how to stay dry overnight, and your breath fogs in front of your face, even though it's spring, which means the fire must have gone out again, and you forgot to cover the cracks in the wall, and now your bed of straw is damp and smells like sour laundry, which is honestly an improvement over what it smelled like last week, and you shuffle to your feet, dizzy and sore, and weirdly numb in one leg. But you ignore it because that's just how it is now. Pain doesn't mean anything unless it stops you from walking. And even then, you can probably still crawl. And outside it's grey again. The kind of grey that doesn't promise rain, but definitely hints at disappointment. And your neighbours are already out, hunched and scowling, and shuffling toward the same pitiful excuse for a communal cooking area. If you can call a few stones and an old iron pot, a kitchen, and someone's dumped something into the pot already, something that smells like boiled bark and leftover tears, and people are taking turns dipping broken bowls and cracked cups in whispering thanks to no one in particular, and you fall in line without thinking, without even trying to pretend you're above it. Because pride gets you nothing here except hunger, and maybe a lecture from someone more miserable than you. And when your turn comes, you reach out with your hands because you lost your bowl 2 days ago and no one's found it, or pretended to find it. And the man stirs the pot with a stick that may or may not have been cleaned this season, and ladles out a scoop into your cup palms. And it burns your skin a little, but you don't care. You slurp it down before it cools, before your hands start shaking too much. And it tastes like wet wood, and a hint of dirt, and something sweet that might be mold, and you don't ask what it was supposed to be. You don't want to know. And as you finish the last drop and wipe your hands on your tunic, you hear someone retch nearby violently, gut deep, and you turn to see a boy, barely 10 years old, doubled over, face pale, trembling, and he throws up something red, something thick, and no one moves at first, because everyone's too tired, too used to it. But then his mother rushes forward, holding his head, whispering to him like words can change what's happening. And someone else mutters about contaminated water or spoiled herbs, or maybe it's the gods again, angry over something someone didn't do. Right, and you back away. Not because you're scared of getting sick, you already are. Everyone is, but because you've seen this too many times. And the end is always the same, and the smell of vomit and bile lingers too long. And you're afraid it'll chase you into your dreams if you let it sit too deep in your lungs and you head toward the stream. If you can call it that, a muddy trickle running through the edge of the village, full of reeds and dead flies, and whatever offerings people leave behind when they run out of patience for gods who don't answer, and you crouch down and rinse your hands, knowing it's pointless, knowing the water's probably worse than what was in your palms. But it's ritual now, a gesture to make you feel like you're trying, like you haven't completely given up. And the cold bites into your skin and makes you gasp. And for a second you feel awake, truly awake. And then a gust of wind slaps you in the face and the spell breaks, and you look up and see the hills in the distance. The same ones you used to dream about running toward when you were younger, and still stupid enough to think there was something better on the other side. And now you know better. Now you know. The plague isn't just here. It's everywhere. In every village and town and city, in every cough and bowl and prayer and shared blanket. And there is no running, only waiting, only hoping. Your turn comes slow, and someone calls your name or something close to your name. And you turn to see a girl holding out a broken piece of flatbread, her eyes wide and tired, and full of something that might be kindness or just shared misery, and you take it without speaking, break it in half, and hand some back. Because that's how survival works now. Not with generosity, but with quiet bargains, silent contracts that say, if I help you now, maybe you'll remember later. Maybe we'll both make it through the week. And you chew slowly, ignoring the sour taste, the crunch that shouldn't be there. And you swallow and breathe and pretend that was enough. And the sky stays grey and the wind picks up. And somewhere, someone else screams, and no one rushes to check. By late afternoon, the wind has stilled, but the quiet it leaves behind doesn't feel peaceful. It feels wrong. Like the air is holding something in, like the village is being watched by something just out of sight. And you find yourself moving slower than usual, not just from hunger or sickness, or the ache that settled into your spine like it paid rent, but from that heaviness that comes when the days worn too long, and you start to wonder if the sun's ever going to bother setting, or if it's just going to hang there mocking you with all that warmth. It keeps just out of reach, and you're dragging your feet past the same huts you pass every day, noticing the same broken carts, the same empty pails, the same shoes drying on sticks that haven't moved in days because the people who wore them don't need them anymore. And your fingers twitch against your side like they're remembering what it used to feel like to do something useful, to carry tools, to build, to cook, to hold. And now all they do is hang and itch and tremble. And you think about how long it's been since you touched someone without bracing for fever. And you turn a corner near the well and nearly walk right into a man crumpled on the ground, coughing so hard his whole body jerks with each breath. And there's blood on his chin, dark and sticky, and you freeze because part of you wants to help, wants to reach out, lift him up, say something. But the rest of you, the part that's still interested in staying alive, keeps your feet nailed in place, and someone else moves in, not to help, but to pull him off the path. Roll him into the shade like trash left out too long. And no one meets each other's eyes, not anymore, because eye contact means acknowledgement, and acknowledgement means responsibility, and responsibility's gotten dangerous these days. So you keep walking, pretending you didn't see him, pretending he didn't look right at you for a second. Like maybe you were the last person on earth who might care, and the guilt lands heavy, but familiar in your gut, right next to the ache and the emptiness, and the dry burn of thirst that keeps whispering. Maybe it's time to drink from the stream again, even though the last time you did, your stomach nearly turned inside out, and you reach your hut, step inside, and it's hot in there, stifling the kind of heat that sits in your chest and presses down with each breath, and you sink down onto the floor, legs splayed out in front of you, and you realize you haven't eaten enough today to even have energy for the usual panic, and your thoughts are fuzzy like someone packed your head with damp wool, and you let your eyes close just for a minute, telling yourself you're not napping, just resting, just letting your mind float a little, and the sound of buzzing wakes you faint at first, then louder, a low whine near your ear, and you swat at it sluggish and clumsy and open your eyes to see a fat fly circling your face, and that's when you smell it. Something rank, sour, familiar, like meat that gave up trying to be meat and decided to become something else entirely, and you crawl to the door, shove it open, and stumble outside, lungs gasping at the air, even if it's not much better. And it hits you that the smell's not coming from inside your hut. It's coming from across the path where a smaller shelter sits quiet, the door half open, and you remember the woman who lived there, the one who hadn't come out in days, the one who always had a cat on her shoulder and a bowl of old barley soup in her hand. And now the cat is gone and the bowl is smashed, and the flies are forming a cloud near the entrance, and you turn away before your stomach decides to empty what little it has, and you sit down hard against the side of your own wall, pressing your forehead to the rough clay surface, hoping the solidness of it will anchor you, and you close your eyes and try to imagine something else, anything else, some other life, a room with clean sheets and a fan in the ceiling, and a glass of water that doesn't taste like rust and goat hair, and a voice, a soft one, telling you everything's going to be okay. But the only voice you hear is someone screaming again, far off this time. Not pain exactly, more like panic, and it fades quick, swallowed up by distance and the sound of dogs barking. And you wonder how many more times you'll hear that today, how many more names you'll forget after the third body, the fourth grave, the fifth whisper of maybe this is finally the end, and the sun finally starts to dip, bleeding itself across the sky in streaks of orange and dull gold. And you sit there watching it like you're seeing something sacred, and maybe you are, because there's not much sacred left around here. Not when the gods are quiet and the priests are frauds, and the people who used to sing now just rock back and forth and talk to things that aren't there, and the light stretches long over the huts and the dirt and the empty bowls and the tired eyes, and for a moment the village looks still, almost peaceful, like it's caught in a breath. And you wonder if this is what dying looks like from a distance. Not chaos, not flames, just silence and dust and a sky that forgets to be blue, The sun disappears like it's ashamed of what it saw today, slipping behind the horizon without ceremony. No fanfare, just a silent exit from a stage. No one claps for any more, and the cold follows fast, crawling up your arms, sinking into your bones. Even though there's no real wind, just that creeping chill that settles in the dirt and rises through your feet like a warning, and you don't go back inside your hut right away, because even though it's technically shelter, it's also a trap, a box of shadows and mold and sickness, with a roof that leaks and walls that whisper. So you sit there in the dusk, knees pulled to your chest, watching as the village slows, dims, folds inward like a dying flower. One door after another shutting with a soft thud, one by one, as people retreat into their corners of the world and pretend the night can't find them if they're quiet enough. And you hear someone light a torch, the sputtering flare of it sparking into life. Then another, and soon the square glows dimly with little pockets of orange light, not enough to chase the dark away, but just enough to remind you it's still out there. And someone begins humming again, that same off-key tune that always seems to show up when things get too still, too silent, and you don't know who it is, or if it's the same person every night, or if it's just some phantom lullaby the village invented to keep the ghosts confused. But it drifts through the air and wraps around your shoulders like a second skin, and you finally push yourself up, legs stiff and shaky, and shuffle back inside, ducking under the low doorway. And the warmth hits you like a wet rag. It's not real warmth, not fire or comfort, just trapped breath and old body heat. But it's something. And you curl up on your straw mat, tucking your arms under your sides to keep your fingers from going numb, and stare at the wall, which is less a wall and more a suggestion of where the outside stops and the inside begins, and you listen to the crackle of someone's fire down the path, to the coughs that come and go in waves, to the occasional snap of a twig, or the distant bark of a dog that doesn't sound like it's barking at anything real. And your eyes stay open because you don't want to dream, not tonight, not again, because the dreams have teeth lately. And they always start the same way. You're walking down a path barefoot and lighter than you are now. And it's warm and golden. And there's laughter ahead. Familiar voices calling your name like they're glad to see you. And just when you get close enough to make out the shapes, they fade, the path crumbles, the warmth rots, and you wake up choking on smoke or blood or both. And tonight, you don't want to wake up like that. So you lie there awake instead, muscles twitching, skin prickling, ears straining for a sound that will let you know you're not the only one still breathing. And eventually, inevitably, you start to drift, not into sleep exactly, but into that weird grey space where time stretches and memories bleed into hallucinations. And you hear your mother's voice for a second, low and soft and half forgotten. And you want to hold on to it, but it slips away. And then you hear something else, a thump, a quick one, like something falling nearby. And your eyes snap open, heart punching against your ribs. And you don't move, you just listen, still and sharp and quiet. And then another thump closer, and you start to count. Your breaths, start to remember where you left the stick. You keep near the door, start to catalogue exits, and then silence again, thick and heavy. And it stretches long enough for your pulse to settle, just a little long enough for your brain to convince itself it was probably nothing. An animal, a branch, a dream, and you close your eyes again, just for a second, and then it's there loud this time. Not a thump, but a scrape, slow and deliberate, like fingernails dragging across the outside wall. And you bolt upright, eyes wide, and it's quiet again, too quiet, and you want to call out. But your throat locks up because what if someone answers? What if something answers and you sit there frozen, heart hammering, and you swear you hear breathing, not yours, not even close, something wheezing and wet and wrong. And then it stops, just vanishes like it never happened. And the silence is louder now, roaring in your ears, and you sit there until your legs cramp and your jaw aches from clenching, and eventually your body wins, and you lie back down, one eye open, staring at the wall, daring it to move, and you don't remember falling asleep. But you must have, because the next thing you know, it's morning. Sort of, just a faint light leaking in through the cracks, and your body feels like you fought someone in your sleep and lost. And you sit up slow, testing your limbs like they're not quite yours. And for a second you wonder if last night even happened, if the sounds were real, or just another trick your brain played to keep you from resting. And you rub your face fingers trembling and whisper to no one, not even yourself, just to the air, still here. And you don't know if it's a victory or a curse, but either way, it's true. You don't rise so much as you unfold slowly, and with every protest from every bone that somehow still hasn't given up your body, creaking like old floorboards under a soaked roof. And for a moment you just sit there on your straw mat, breathing shallow, your mouth dry and metallic, and your limbs tingling like they've forgotten how to be yours. And the light leaking into the hut isn't sunlight exactly, more like the colourless glow of another morning that never asked to exist, a pale and indifferent haze that barely bothers to cast shadows. And you drag yourself upright, leaning against the wall, like it might remember how to support you. And you wonder idly, absurdly, if this is what resurrection feels like, clawing your way back into a body that's not ready for you yet. And you shuffle to the doorway, blink against the pale grey of the outside world, and step into a day that looks exactly like yesterday, and will probably look exactly like tomorrow. And your breath comes in uneven little huffs, your chest tight and sore, and you cough once, just to check. And sure enough, there it is again, that rusty edge, that faint taste of iron that reminds you everything inside you is probably wrong, probably decaying, probably hollow. And the village is already moving, already creaking into motion. People scuttling between huts like ants who forgot where the sugar is, some hauling empty pails, others with hunched shoulders and glazed eyes. And there's no talking, not really, just the occasional grunt, the scrape of sandals on dirt, the sighs of people too tired to be properly afraid. And you start walking, no destination in mind, just moving. Because stopping means thinking, and thinking means feeling. And feeling is a luxury no one can afford anymore. And you pass the well, past the square, past the charred skeleton of what used to be the baker's house, before the fever took all 5 of them in one night, and someone decided burning it down was easier than cleaning it out. And eventually your feet carry you toward the edge of the village, toward the slope, where the burial pits are not the proper ones near the temple, but the new ones, the ones dug quick and shallow and without names. Just piles of earth that shift and sink and sometimes stink if the wind's wrong. And you stand there for a moment, not praying, not grieving, just looking. And there's a part of you that wants to lie down beside one of them, just for a bit, just to see if maybe it feels easier down there, quieter, warmer maybe. And you wonder if anyone would notice, if anyone would care, or if they'd just step over you on their way to the fields and mutter something about another mouth. They don't have to feed. And then you hear a voice behind you, soft, rough, calling your name, not your full name, not the one from before, but the version people use now, the clipped, tired version. And you turn to see a kid, maybe 12, holding something wrapped in cloth, and he says it's from his mother, says she owed you for that time. You helped patch their roof back in the rainy season, and he hands it to you, eyes down like he's embarrassed by the gesture, like he doesn't want credit for still having a conscience. And you take it without asking what it is, just nod once, and he walks off before you can thank him, disappearing between the huts like a shadow that never wanted to be seen. And you unwrap the cloth and find a chunk of something that might be bread or root or hardened porridge. And it doesn't matter. It's edible. It's warmish. And your hands shake as you hold it. Not from hunger, but from something deeper. And you sit down right there on the edge of the slope and eat slowly, chewing each bite like it might vanish if you rush it. And for the first time in what feels like years, you don't feel entirely alone. And that's worse in a way, because now there's something to lose again. Something small and tender and human that has nothing to do with survival and everything to do with remembering that people used to mean something to each other, that kindness didn't always come wrapped in shame, that a gesture like this used to be normal, not revolutionary, and you stare down at the empty cloth, wondering if you'll ever be able to repay it, wondering if you'll live long enough to try, and for a few seconds you just sit there and let the wind touch your face and pretend it doesn't smell like ash and sickness, and pretend the birds you hear in the distance aren't vultures, and pretend that you might make it to nightfall without losing another piece of yourself, and the sun, dull and reluctant, crawls higher into the sky, dragging the day behind it, and you stand, bones clicking, skin itching, stomach turning, but not from hunger anymore, and you head back toward the village with the cloth tucked under your arm like a secret, like a promise, like a memory of something softer than all this. The sky turns that murky shade between afternoon and evening, where it's not quite light anymore, but not dark enough to call it night. Just a grey wash that makes the world feel blurry, like everything's been smudged with a dirty thumb, and you're back in the village now, walking slow, stomach full, in that unfamiliar, almost suspicious way that makes you wonder if your body's going to rebel later. Like it forgot how to digest gratitude, and you pass by a cluster of people hunched over near the communal hearth, the smoke rising in lazy, reluctant spirals that smell more like damp wood than fire, and someone's mumbling about a vision they had about gods returning in dreams and demanding offerings, and no one argues, not because they believe it, but because belief has started to feel like the only thing keeping some people from walking into the woods and not coming back. And you keep your head down, your eyes forward, because you've learned the hard way that looking too interested in someone else's hallucinations gets you volunteered for rituals, and rituals these days involve things like goat blood and fever smoke and chants that go on long after anyone remembers why they started. And you cut through the narrow path between huts, boots kicking up soft clouds of dry earth that stick to your ankles like guilt. And everything feels slower now, like the village is winding itself down, like it knows. Night is coming and doesn't want to face it fully awake, and your body agrees every step heavier than the last, every breath. A little tighter, like your lungs are filling with fog, and you think about crawling into your hut and curling up under that scratchy wool scrap. You still call a blanket just giving up on the day. All together, but something keeps pulling you forward. Some small, stupid hope that maybe if you keep moving, you'll stumble into something worth remembering. And then you hear it faint at first, high and wavering like a thread caught in the wind, a song, or maybe just someone humming again, the same tune from last night, or a variation of it drifting through the alleys like a ghost, trying to remember how to be human. And it stops you cold. Not because it's beautiful, it isn't, but because it's familiar. And in a world where everything is changing and dying and slipping out of your grasp, familiarity feels like a rope tossed into a river, and you follow the sound, feet crunching softly over pebbles, and it leads you to a small courtyard you forgot existed, a place tucked between the bakery ruins and what used to be the mill. And there's a girl sitting in the center, legs crossed, eyes closed, swaying slightly as she sings to no one, or maybe to everyone. And she looks young, but not innocent. The kind of face that's seen too much too fast, but still chooses to sing. And she's got a small bowl in her lap with something burning in it. Herbs, probably, or dried orange peel, if she was lucky enough to find some. And the smell is sweet and sharp and completely out of place. And for a second you feel like you've stepped into another world, or a memory pretending to be real. And she opens her eyes and sees you, and doesn't flinch, doesn't stop, just tilts her head and keeps humming. And you sit down across from her, not asking permission, not offering a reason, because both of you know. There's nothing to explain anymore. And the two of you just sit there while the light fades, wrapped in the soft smoke and the strange song. And it's not enough. It's not salvation or healing or safety. But it's something, and something's better than nothing. And eventually she stops singing, sets the bowl aside and says, "It keeps the bad away." And you don't ask what she means because you already know. And you nod and say, "Yeah." And she smiles, small and crooked and tired. And for a brief moment, you're not in a plague-ravaged, forgotten corner of the empire. You're just a person sitting with another person, sharing space, sharing breath. And when she finally stands and walks away, leaving the bowl still smoking beside you, you stay, hands resting on your knees, eyes on the flickering embers, and you think about how easy it would be to believe her, how badly you want to believe her, how nice it would be if the song really did keep the bad away, if the gods were still listening, if tomorrow didn't already feel like a rerun of today, and you scoop up the bowl, carry it with you, like it matters, and when you get back to your hut, you set it near the doorway right beneath the cracked wooden charm that hasn't protected you from anything, and you sit back down, the smell of herbs still clinging to your skin, and as the last of the light disappears and the stars begin to claw their way into the sky, you whisper a line from her song, not because you believe it, but because part of you still wants to. And you close your eyes and wait for the night to decide what kind of monster it's going to be. The night doesn't so much arrive as it seeps in slow and sure like ink, spreading across fabric, staining everything in its path with that cold stillness that makes your skin feel too thin and the air too loud. And you're sitting in your hut with the bowl of burned herbs still smouldering near the door, a little curl of smoke rising like it's trying to hold back whatever wants to come in. And for a moment, you let yourself believe it might be working, that maybe songs and smoke and quiet kindness are enough to carve out a pocket of peace in a world that keeps fraying at the edges. And the silence outside is different tonight, not the usual thick blanket of breath, holding dread, but something softer, like even the dark is tired, like even fear has taken the night off. And you lie down slowly, easing your bones onto the mat that's done more damage than comfort, pulling the scratchy blanket over you, like it's armor, even though it doesn't keep out the cold or the dreams or the sounds that creep in between breaths. And you stare at the ceiling, tracing the cracks with your eyes, listening to the distant murmur of someone snoring across the path and the faint drip of water somewhere behind the wall. And you think about how small your world has become, how everything beyond these four walls feels unreal now, like something you read about a long time ago and then forgot. And you wonder if there's still a city out there somewhere, bustling and clean, with candles in windows and music that isn't sung out of desperation, if people still argue over bread prices instead of survival, if they still get up in the morning and stretch and complain about their shoes being too tight and their roofs leaking just a little. And for the first time in a while, you let yourself remember what it was like to have a favorite food, a favorite person, a favorite place to sit when the sun was warm but not too hot, and your chest aches with the weight of it, with how far away all of that feels now, like you lost it in a fog and forgot which way was forward. And then something shifts outside, just a creak, a footstep maybe, and your body reacts before your mind does, freezing breath, halting eyes wide, and you listen, counting seconds between sounds, heart thudding loud enough to drown out thought, but nothing else comes. No knock, no whisper, just quiet again. And you realize you're holding your breath, and you let it out, slow, reminding yourself, you're still here, still alive, still one step ahead of whatever's been catching up all year. And you close your eyes, not because you trust the dark, but because keeping them open doesn't change anything. and you drift in that space between sleep and alertness, where your brain plays memories on a loop and mixes them with things you've only imagined, like the sound of a spoon tapping against a real ceramic bowl, or the feeling of grass under your feet instead of dirt and dead straw. And maybe you dream, or maybe you just float. And when the first light of dawn begins to seep in grey and fragile and almost shy, you sit up slowly, limbs stiff and reluctant, and you stretch your arms toward the ceiling, like you're reaching for something just out of reach. And the day begins again, not with a bang, but a breath. And you tell yourself it's going to be okay because that's what you do. Now you say it even when it isn't, and you try to make it true by saying it enough times. And you step outside and breathe in the cold morning air that smells like smoke and dirt. And maybe, just maybe, the faintest hint of something clean. And you look up at the sky still streaked with the last threads of night, and you nod once to no one in particular. And you keep moving because that's what survival is now. Not glory, not triumph, just movement, just the next step, just getting through. And as the village slowly comes back to life around you, as voices start to murmur and doors creak open, and the sound of someone coughing reminds you what's at stake, you take a deep breath and whisper to yourself, "We're not done yet." And maybe it's a promise, or maybe it's just noise to fill the silence. But either way, you start walking, and that counts. That always counts. And now, as this story closes and the screen dims just a little, I want to say thank you for listening, for spending this quiet stretch of time with me. And wherever you are right now, whether you're working late, drifting towards sleep, or simply searching for a little stillness, I hope you feel safe. I hope you feel grounded. And I hope you wake tomorrow feeling rested and clear, and ready for a fresh day of learning, effort, and good, steady work. Because no matter how heavy the past may have felt, tomorrow is still yours to carry differently, and you deserve a soft place to land at the end of it. So take care of yourself, rest well, and good night.